At my husband's funeral, the priest gave me an envelope. Inside was the truth that he hidden for 30 years. I never imagined that the worst day of my life would also become the day everything I believed in shattered into 1,000 pieces. My name is Margaret, I'm 56 years old, and I thought I knew my husband. I thought I knew my life. But standing there in that church, dressed in black, surrounded by flowers and whispered condolences, I was about to discover that 30 years of marriage had been built on a foundation of lies so deep, so carefully constructed, that even now I struggle to comprehend how one man could live two completely different lives without either side ever knowing the truth. The morning of Robert's funeral was gray and cold. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. I stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom, the bedroom we had shared for 3 decades, and I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. My eyes were swollen from crying, my hands trembled as I tried to fasten the pearl necklace Robert had given me on our 25th anniversary. Those pearls felt like a lie against my skin now, but I didn't know that yet. I was still innocent. Still believing that my husband had been a good man who loved me, who had built a life with me, who had been faithful and honest and everything a partner should be. The church was packed. Robert had been well liked in our community. He was a successful accountant, always helping people with their taxes, always volunteering at the food bank, always showing up when someone needed him. People kept telling me how lucky I had been to have him. How devoted he was. How much he loved me. Each word felt like a knife, but I smiled and nodded because that's what you do at funerals. You accept the condolences. You hold yourself together. You don't fall apart in front of everyone, no matter how much you want to scream. Father Michael conducted the service. He had known Robert for years, had shared dinners at our table, had baptized the children of our friends. His voice was steady and calm as he spoke about eternal rest and God's mercy, but I noticed something different in his eyes when he looked at me. Something that made my stomach twist with an emotion I couldn't name yet. It wasn't pity. It was something closer to guilt, or perhaps dread. The service went on forever and yet ended too quickly. There were hymns I couldn't sing because my throat was too tight. There were prayers I couldn't focus on because my mind kept drifting to memories of Robert. His laugh. The way he always made coffee for me in the morning. The way he held my hand when we walked. Had any of it been real? Of course it had been real. He had loved me. I was sure of it. I had to be sure of it because otherwise, what had the last 30 years of my life meant? When the final prayer ended, people began filing past the casket to pay their last respects. I stood there, numb, shaking hands and accepting hugs from people whose faces blurred together. That's when Father Michael approached me. His face was pale, his hands were shaking slightly, and he was carrying a white envelope. Not just any envelope. This one looked old, worn at the edges, as if it had been handled many times over the years. He leaned in close and spoke quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Margaret, Robert asked me to give this to you after he passed. He made me promise. I'm sorry. I'm so very sorry." Before I could ask what he meant, before I could process the fear in his eyes, he pressed the envelope into my hands and walked away quickly, as if he couldn't bear to be near me a moment longer. I stood there holding that envelope, feeling its weight, knowing somehow that whatever was inside would change everything. My sister Linda touched my arm. "What is that?" she asked. I couldn't answer. I just shook my head and tucked the envelope into my purse. Not here. Not now. Not in front of all these people who thought they knew Robert, who thought they knew us. The reception at our house was torture. People ate the sandwiches that the church ladies had prepared. They drank coffee and tea and told stories about Robert. What a good man he was. What a tragedy to lose him so suddenly to that heart attack. Only 58 years old. Too young. Too unfair. I nodded and smiled and felt that envelope burning a hole in my purse like it was made of fire instead of paper. Finally, after what felt like years, the last guest left. Linda offered to stay, but I told her I needed to be alone. She hugged me tight and made me promise to call if I needed anything. The moment the door closed behind her, I went straight to the kitchen, poured myself a large glass of wine, and sat down at the table. My hands were shaking as I pulled out the envelope. My name was written on the front in Robert's handwriting. Just my name. Margaret. Nothing else. I opened it slowly, carefully, as if the paper itself might hurt me. Inside was a letter, folded neatly, and something else. A key. Small, silver, with a number engraved on it. The kind of key you'd get for a storage unit or maybe a safe deposit box. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I set the key aside and unfolded the letter. Robert's handwriting filled 3 pages, front and back. I started to read, and with each word, each sentence, each devastating revelation, I felt my world crumbling around me. My dearest Margaret, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are about to learn the truth I have kept from you for our entire marriage. I am a coward for not telling you while I was alive. I am a coward for asking Father Michael to give you this letter after my death. But I could never find the courage to face you, to see the pain in your eyes, to watch you realize that the man you loved was not who you thought he was. I have loved you, Margaret. Please believe that. Everything we built together was real to me. But it was not the whole truth. My hands trembled so badly I had to set the letter down. I took a long drink of wine and forced myself to keep reading. There is an apartment. The key in this envelope will open the door. The address is 428 Riverside Drive, apartment 3B. I have been paying for this apartment for 28 years. Inside, you will find answers to questions you didn't even know you had. You will find proof of a life I lived alongside the one I lived with you. I cannot explain everything in this letter. I can only tell you that I am sorry. I am so deeply, truly sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen the way it did. But life is complicated, Margaret, and I made choices that I regret with every fiber of my being. I stopped reading. I couldn't breathe. An apartment? For 28 years? What did that mean? Was it an affair? Had Robert been keeping a mistress? Was that what this was about? My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. I forced myself to keep reading. I know you will hate me when you learn the truth. I know I will lose whatever love and respect you had for me. But you deserve to know. You deserve to understand why I did what I did, even if you can never forgive me. Go to the apartment, Margaret. Face the truth that I was too weak to tell you myself. And know that despite everything, despite all my lies and deceptions, my love for you was always real. Always. Even when everything else was a lie, that remained true. The letter ended there, except for his signature at the bottom. Just his name. Robert. No declaration of love. No final goodbye. Just his name, written in the same handwriting that had written me love notes when we were young, that had signed birthday cards and anniversary cards and all the little everyday papers that make up a life together. I sat there for a long time, staring at that letter, at that key, trying to process what I had just read. Part of me wanted to throw the key away, to burn the letter, to pretend I had never seen it. To preserve the memory of Robert as I had always known him, as the man I had loved, as the husband I had mourned. But another part of me, the part that was already starting to feel the first sharp edges of betrayal cutting into my heart, needed to know. Needed to understand. Needed to see whatever was in that apartment. I looked at the clock. It was almost 7 in the evening. I could go now. Drive to Riverside Drive, let myself into that apartment, and confront whatever secrets Robert had been keeping. Or I could wait until morning, when I was rested, when I was stronger, when I had time to prepare myself for what I might find. But I knew I wouldn't sleep. I knew that key would haunt me all night long, and the questions would eat me alive. I grabbed my coat, my purse, the key, and the letter. I left my house, the house Robert and I had bought together 25 years ago, the house where we had celebrated birthdays and holidays and all the ordinary moments that make up a marriage. I got into my car and I drove. Riverside Drive was only 20 minutes away, in a neighborhood I knew well. We had friends who lived there. We had attended parties there. And all along, Robert had been keeping an apartment there, keeping secrets there, living some other life that I knew nothing about. When I pulled up in front of 428 Riverside Drive, my heart was racing. It was a nice building. Not fancy, but well-maintained. The kind of place a single professional might live. Or apparently, the kind of place where a married man kept his secrets. I sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, trying to find the courage to go inside. Write in the comments if you've ever discovered a secret that changed everything you thought you knew about someone you loved. Because that's where I was in that moment. On the edge of a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to face. I got out of the car. I walked to the front door. The key worked in the main entrance. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor, my legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. Apartment 3B was at the end of the hall. I stood in front of that door for what felt like forever, the key in my hand, my whole body shaking. This was it. Once I opened that door, there would be no going back. No more pretending. No more innocence. Just the truth, whatever it was. I put the key in the lock. I turned it. I heard the click. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. And what I found there, in that apartment that my husband had been hiding for 28 years, was so much worse than I could have ever imagined. The apartment was furnished. Not like a storage space or a secret office, but like someone lived there. There was a couch, a television, a dining table with chairs. The kitchen was stocked with food. There were dishes in the cabinets, towels in the bathroom. This wasn't just a place Robert visited occasionally. This was a home. A second home. A parallel life running alongside the one he lived with me. I walked through the apartment in a daze, opening doors, looking in closets, trying to understand what I was seeing. In the bedroom, I found a closet full of men's clothes. Robert's clothes. Shirts I had never seen him wear. Shoes I had never noticed missing. It was like discovering that my husband had been living as two different people, maintaining two completely separate wardrobes, two completely separate lives. But it was the photographs that destroyed me. They were everywhere. On the walls, on the dresser, on the bookshelf. And in every single one of them, Robert was with another woman. A white woman with blonde hair and a gentle smile. They were at the beach together. At restaurants. At what looked like family gatherings. And in many of the photos, there was a child. A boy. Dark-haired like Robert, with the same eyes, the same smile. A boy who grew older as the photographs progressed chronologically around the room. A baby became a toddler, became a child, became a teenager, became a young man. Robert had a son. A son I had never known about. A son he had hidden from me for his entire life. And a woman. Not just a mistress. These photos weren't hidden away in a shoebox. They were displayed proudly, lovingly, like any family would display their memories. This was Robert's other family. His secret family. The family he came home to when he told me he was working late, or traveling for business, or helping a friend. All those times over 30 years when he was somewhere else, he was here. With them. I sank down onto the edge of the bed, the photographs clutched in my shaking hands, and I finally let myself break. The sobs came from somewhere deep inside me, a place of pain I didn't know existed. Everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. Every moment of my marriage was now tainted with the knowledge that Robert had been living two lives, loving two families, being two different people. And I had never suspected. Not once in 30 years had I ever thought my husband was capable of this level of deception. I don't know how long I sat there crying, but eventually the tears stopped coming and I was left with something harder and sharper than grief. Anger. Rage. A burning need to understand how this had happened, how Robert had managed to pull this off for so long, and who else had known about it. Father Michael had known, obviously. That's why he had looked so guilty when he handed me that envelope. Who else? Who else in my life had been keeping Robert's secret? I stood up on shaky legs and started searching the apartment more thoroughly. I needed answers. I needed to understand everything. In the nightstand drawer, I found more documents. Bills for the apartment, all in Robert's name. Insurance papers. And then something that made my blood run cold. A marriage certificate. Robert's name was on it, but the bride's name wasn't Margaret. It was Sarah. Sarah Hutchins. And the date on the certificate was from 32 years ago. 2 years before Robert and I got married. My mind was reeling. Had Robert been married before? He had never mentioned it. Never said he had an ex-wife, never talked about a previous marriage. But here was the proof, right in front of me. Except there was no divorce decree with it. No papers showing that the marriage had ended. Just the certificate and then, in a folder behind it, something even more devastating. Birth certificate for Daniel Robert Hutchins, born 28 years ago. Mother, Sarah Hutchins. Father, Robert Hutchins. I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. This wasn't an affair. This was a whole other marriage, a whole other family, running parallel to mine for our entire relationship. Robert had been married to Sarah when he married me. Which meant my marriage might not have even been legal. Which meant I might not actually be his widow. Which meant everything about my life for the past 30 years had been built on a foundation of fraud and lies. I heard a key in the front door and froze. Someone was coming in. My heart hammered in my chest. I didn't know whether to hide or run or confront whoever was about to walk through that door. Before I could decide, the door opened and a woman stepped inside. The woman from the photographs. Sarah. She looked older than she did in the pictures, lines around her eyes and gray in her blonde hair, but it was definitely her. And when she saw me standing there in her living room, surrounded by the evidence of her life with my husband, her face went white as a sheet. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Two women who had both loved the same man, who had both been deceived by him, who had both built their lives around a lie. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You must be Margaret." I nodded, unable to form words. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, as if her legs couldn't quite hold her up. I knew this day would come eventually. Robert always said it wouldn't, that he had everything under control, but I knew better. I knew that one day the truth would come out and we'd all have to face what he did to us. What he did to us? I finally found my voice, and it came out harsh and bitter. "You were the other woman. You knew about me. You helped him lie to me for 30 years. But even as I said it, I realized it wasn't quite right. Sarah wasn't the other woman. I was. She had been first. Her marriage certificate was dated before mine. She had his child. She was the original family, and somehow, I had become the secret, except I hadn't known I was a secret." Sarah shook her head slowly. "It's not that simple. Nothing with Robert was ever simple. Please, sit down. Let me make some tea. Let me tell you the whole story, because you deserve to know the truth. God knows Robert never had the courage to tell either of us everything." She moved into the kitchen and I followed her, feeling like I was in a dream. A nightmare. Some altered reality where nothing made sense anymore. I sat at the kitchen table while Sarah filled a kettle and set it on the stove. Her hands were shaking almost as much as mine. Finally, she sat down across from me and took a deep breath. "Robert and I met in college. We fell in love. We got married right after graduation. I was pregnant with Daniel within the first year. Everything seemed perfect. Robert got a job at an accounting firm. I was finishing my teaching degree. We were young and happy and building a life together." She paused, staring down at her hands. But Robert was ambitious. Too ambitious. He wanted more than we had. He wanted success, money, status. The firm he worked for sent him to a conference in Chicago. "That's where he met you, isn't it?" "At that conference?" I nodded slowly, remembering. Robert and I had met at a professional development conference. He had told me he was single, building his career, looking for someone to share his life with. We had clicked immediately. By the end of the conference, we were inseparable. Within 6 months, we were engaged. A year after that, married. He never told you about me, Sarah continued. Never mentioned that he had a wife and a baby son back home. He created a whole new identity in your city, started a whole new life with you, and somehow managed to keep both of us separate for almost 30 years. I found out about you when Daniel was 3 years old. I discovered some receipts, made some phone calls, hired a private investigator. When I confronted Robert, he broke down and confessed everything. Why didn't you divorce him? I asked, my voice shaking. Why didn't you tell anyone? Why did you let him keep lying to me? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Because I was young and stupid and terrified. Robert convinced me that if I divorced him, if I exposed him, he would lose everything. His job, his reputation, his ability to support us. He said if I kept quiet, he would take care of both families. He would make sure Daniel and I had everything we needed. He promised he still loved me, that you were just a mistake he didn't know how to fix. A mistake? The word came out as a bitter laugh. I was a mistake. Sarah reached across the table and grabbed my hand. No. No, Margaret, that's not what I meant. You weren't a mistake. What Robert did was the mistake. He should have been honest with both of us from the start. He should have divorced me before he married you, or he should have stayed with his first family and never pursued you at all. But instead, he chose the coward's way out. He chose to live 2 lives and hurt both of us in the process. The kettle started whistling and Sarah got up to make the tea. I sat there, processing everything she had told me. 30 years. Robert had maintained this double life for 30 years. How was that even possible? How had he managed to keep track of all the lies, all the schedules, all the separate birthdays and anniversaries and everyday moments that make up 2 different families? The logistics alone seemed impossible, never mind the emotional betrayal. Sarah set a cup of tea in front of me and sat back down. I wanted to leave him so many times. Especially when Daniel got older and started asking why his father was never around for school events or birthday parties or important moments. Robert would show up for some things, but he always had to leave early or arrive late because he was balancing time between 2 families. Daniel grew up knowing he had to share his father with some mysterious other life, and it hurt him. It still hurts him. Your son, I said quietly. Daniel. Does he know about me? Sarah nodded. He's known for years. Robert told him when he was 16. Sat him down and explained that he had another family, another life. Daniel was devastated. He already felt like his father was absent too much, and learning that it was because he had a whole other family made it so much worse. He's angry at Robert. He's been angry for a long time. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more stories like this, because I promise you, what happened next changed everything. Daniel wanted to meet me. He wanted to confront his father's lies face to face with the woman who represented the other half of Robert's double life. But Robert wouldn't allow it. He said it would destroy everything, that the 2 worlds could never meet, that it had to stay secret forever. Daniel has resented him for that ever since. I took a sip of the tea, barely tasting it. My mind was spinning with questions. Where did he tell you he was when he was with me? How did he explain all his absences? Sarah gave a sad smile. Business trips. Conferences. Emergency client meetings. Consulting jobs in other cities. Robert was very good at his work, and he used that as cover. He genuinely did travel sometimes for legitimate business, but he padded those trips to include time with you. And when he was supposed to be with me, he told you the same lies. He told you he was traveling for work, didn't he? I nodded, feeling sick. All those times Robert had kissed me goodbye and said he had to go out of town for a few days. I had never questioned it. He was building his career. He was providing for us. Of course he had to travel sometimes. I had been so proud of his dedication, his work ethic. And all along, he was just going back and forth between 2 wives, 2 homes, 2 completely separate existences. How did he afford it? I asked. 2 households, 2 families. That couldn't have been cheap. Sarah shrugged. Robert was very good with money. That's why he was such a successful accountant. He managed both households carefully, made sure neither of us ever went without, never raised suspicions by spending too much or too little. He had separate bank accounts, separate credit cards. Everything was meticulously planned and organized. Looking back, I realized that his whole life was like one of his accounting ledgers. 2 columns, perfectly balanced, with him trying desperately to make sure neither side ever discovered the other. We sat in silence for a moment, 2 women bound together by the same man's lies. Finally, I asked the question I wasn't sure I wanted the answer to. Did you love him? Do you still love him? Sarah's eyes filled with tears again. I did. For so long, I did. Even after I found out about you, even after I knew he had betrayed me in the worst possible way, I still loved him. He was my husband. He was Daniel's father. And when he was with us, he was present and loving and everything a husband and father should be. It was only later that I realized that wasn't enough. That being loved part-time isn't really being loved at all. And now? I pressed. Now that he's gone. Sarah wiped her eyes. Now I feel relieved. And that makes me feel guilty. But I spent almost 30 years living a half-life, sharing my husband with someone else, keeping his secret because I was afraid of what would happen if I told the truth. Now he's gone and I don't have to pretend anymore. I don't have to keep lying. And maybe that makes me a terrible person, but it's the truth. I understood exactly what she meant. Part of me was relieved too. Relieved that I didn't have to look at Robert and wonder if I could ever trust him again. Relieved that I didn't have to make the impossible decision of whether to stay with him or leave him after learning what he had done. Death had made that choice for me, and while I mourned the man I thought I knew, I was grateful that I didn't have to face the man he really was. What happens now? I asked. Between us. Between our families. What do we do with this truth? Sarah looked at me for a long moment. I don't know. That's up to you, Margaret. You didn't know about any of this. You're as much a victim of Robert's lies as I am, maybe more because at least I knew what was happening for most of our marriage. You were kept completely in the dark. If you want to expose everything, if you want to tell people the truth about who Robert really was, I'll understand. I thought about it. Thought about going public with Robert's betrayal, about telling our friends and family and community that the man they had all admired was actually a fraud and a bigamist. Part of me wanted that. Wanted everyone to know the truth, wanted Robert's reputation destroyed the way he had destroyed my life. But another part of me was exhausted. Devastated. Not sure I had the strength to endure the pity and the gossip and the endless questions that would come with exposing the truth. I need time, I finally said. I need time to process all of this, to figure out what I want to do. But there's one thing I need first. I need to meet him. Daniel. Your son. Robert's son. He's part of this story too, and he deserves to know that I'm not his enemy. That I didn't know. That I never would have married Robert if I had known he already had a family. Sarah nodded slowly. He'll want to meet you too. He's been curious about you for years. Let me call him. Let me see if he can come over now. She pulled out her phone and made a call. I heard her speaking softly to someone, explaining that I was here, that I had found out the truth, that I wanted to meet him. After a few minutes, she hung up and turned back to me. He's on his way. He only lives about 20 minutes from here. Margaret, I should warn you, Daniel is angry. He's been angry at Robert for a long time, and I'm not sure how he'll react to meeting you. Just remember that his anger isn't about you. It's about what his father did to all of us. I nodded, bracing myself for whatever was coming. I had already survived the funeral, the letter, the discovery of the apartment, and learning about Robert's double life. What was one more shock on top of everything else? I finished my tea and Sarah made fresh cups for both of us. We sat in that kitchen in awkward silence, two women who should have been enemies but were really just fellow survivors of the same man's deception. 23 minutes later, we heard a key in the door. My heart started racing again. This was it. I was about to meet my husband's son. The son I never knew existed. The young man who represented everything Robert had kept hidden from me. The door opened and a man walked in. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with dark hair and eyes that were unmistakably Robert's. He was handsome, well-dressed, and when he saw me sitting at the kitchen table, he stopped in his tracks. For a moment, we just looked at each other. I saw Robert in his face, in the shape of his jaw and the set of his shoulders. But I also saw Sarah in his eyes, in the way he carried himself. He was the physical proof of their life together, the child that represented everything I had never had with Robert. We had tried for children early in our marriage, but it hadn't happened. Robert had always said it was okay, that we didn't need kids to be happy. Now I wondered if he had been secretly relieved. One less complication in his already impossibly complicated double life. "You're Margaret," Daniel said finally. His voice was deeper than I expected, rough with emotion. "You're my father's other wife." I nodded, not sure what to say. "And you're Daniel, Robert's son." He crossed the room slowly, like he was approaching something dangerous, and sat down at the table with us. Up close, the resemblance to Robert was even more striking. It was like looking at a ghost, at a younger version of the man I had buried that morning. "Did you know?" he asked abruptly. "Did you know about us? About my mom and me? Were you in on it?" I shook my head quickly. "No. I swear to you, I had no idea. I found out today. At the funeral. Father Michael gave me a letter and a key to this apartment. I came here and I found out everything. I'm just as shocked as you are. Just as hurt." Daniel studied my face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether I was telling the truth. Finally, he leaned back in his chair and ran a hand through his hair, so much like a gesture Robert used to make that it hurt to watch. "My whole life, I had to share my father with someone I wasn't allowed to know," Daniel said, his voice tight with old anger. "Every time he left, every time he chose you over us, I felt like I wasn't good enough. Like I wasn't important enough for him to stay. Do you know what that does to a kid? Growing up feeling like you're not your father's priority? And then when I was 16 and he finally told me the truth, that he had a whole other family that he loved just as much, maybe more, it destroyed me." Tears were running down my face. "I'm so sorry. I never knew. I never would have wanted any child to feel that way. If I had known about you, I would have. I don't know what I would have done. But I wouldn't have let it continue. I wouldn't have let Robert keep living this lie." Daniel laughed bitterly. "Yeah, well, my mom knew and she let it continue. For almost 30 years she knew and she kept his secret and she let you live in ignorance while we lived in the shadows. So forgive me if I don't have a lot of sympathy for either of you." Sarah flinched like he had struck her. "Daniel, please. We've talked about this. I made the choices I thought were best at the time. I was trying to protect you, to give you a stable home, to make sure you had everything you needed." Daniel turned to his mother, his eyes flashing. "What I needed was a father who was actually present. What I needed was honesty. What I needed was not to grow up feeling like a dirty secret." "You weren't a secret to us," Sarah said softly. "You were our whole world. Your father loved you more than anything." Daniel stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Don't tell me he loved me. If he loved me, he would have been honest. He would have divorced you and married Margaret properly, or he would have stayed with us and never started a second family. What he did wasn't love. It was selfishness. It was cowardice. And now he's dead and we're all left here trying to pick up the pieces of his lies." I stood up too, facing Daniel across the kitchen. You're right. You're absolutely right. What Robert did was selfish and cowardly and wrong. He hurt all of us. But we're here now, the three of us, and we have a choice. We can let his lies continue to hurt us, or we can face the truth together and figure out how to move forward. I know I can't replace the time you lost with your father. I know I can't fix what he broke. But I want you to know that I see you. I acknowledge you. You are Robert's son and you have every right to grieve him and be angry at him and feel however you feel. Daniel's eyes were shining with unshed tears. I don't want to grieve him. I want to hate him. But I can't because he was my dad and part of me still loves him even though I know he didn't deserve it. His voice broke and suddenly he wasn't an angry young man anymore. He was just a hurt kid who had lost his father and never really had him to begin with. Sarah went to her son and pulled him into a hug. He resisted for a moment, then collapsed into her arms, finally letting himself cry. I stood there watching them, feeling like an intruder in this moment of grief that belonged to them. But Sarah reached out a hand to me, pulling me into their embrace, and suddenly we were all crying together. Three people bound by one man's betrayal, grieving not just for Robert but for all the years we lost to his lies, for the relationships we never got to have because he kept us separated. When the tears finally stopped, we pulled apart and sat back down at the table. Daniel wiped his eyes and looked at me more carefully. I've wondered about you my whole life. What you were like. If you were nice. If you made him happy. If he loved you more than he loved us. I reached across the table and took his hand. I don't think it was about more or less. I think Robert loved us both, in his own broken way. But that doesn't excuse what he did. And for what it's worth, I've been robbed too. I never got to have children. I never got to have the full honest marriage I thought I had. We've all lost something because of his choices. Daniel nodded slowly. I have a million questions. About you. About your life with him. About what he was like when he was with you. I smiled sadly. And I have a million questions about you. About what he was like as a father. About the life he lived here. Maybe we can help each other find answers. Maybe we can piece together the whole picture of who Robert really was, instead of just the fragments we each saw. Sarah stood up. It's late. We've all been through too much today. Margaret, why don't you stay here tonight? We have a guest room. In the morning, we can start figuring out what comes next. How to handle the estate, the funeral arrangements, all the legal complications that come with Robert's death. I wanted to say no, to go back to my own house, my own bed. But the thought of being alone with my grief and my anger was too much. So I nodded. Thank you. Yes. I'll stay. Sarah showed me to the guest room, gave me some of her clothes to sleep in, and left me alone. I lay in that strange bed in that strange apartment, surrounded by evidence of my husband's secret life, and I thought about everything that had happened since that morning. The funeral felt like it had been years ago, not hours. I had aged a lifetime in a single day, had lost my innocence and my illusions and my sense of who I was. Margaret, the wife of Robert. Margaret, who thought she knew her husband. But who was I now? Who was Margaret without the identity I had built around being Robert's wife? I didn't have answers yet. All I had were questions and pain and the knowledge that tomorrow, and all the days after, I would have to rebuild myself from the ground up. I would have to figure out who I was when I wasn't living a lie. When I wasn't part of someone else's deception. When I was just myself, alone, free from the weight of secrets I never knew I was carrying. I must have fallen asleep eventually because I woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then it all came rushing back. The funeral. The letter. The apartment. Sarah and Daniel. I got up slowly, my body aching like I had been in a fight, and made my way to the kitchen. Sarah was at the stove making breakfast. Daniel was at the table with his laptop open, his face serious and focused. Good morning, Sarah said gently. I made coffee. And eggs if you're hungry. I wasn't sure I could eat, but I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down across from Daniel. He looked up from his laptop and gave me a small nod. I've been looking into the legal aspects of all this. It's complicated. Really complicated. Your marriage to my father was technically invalid because he never divorced my mother. Which means you might not have any legal claim to his estate. Everything he owned, the house you lived in, the accounts in his name, it might all belong to my mother as his legal wife. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been so focused on the emotional betrayal that I hadn't even thought about the legal implications. The house I had lived in for 25 years might not be mine. The savings we had built together might not be mine. Legally, I might be nothing. Just a woman who had unknowingly lived with a married man for 30 years. What about common law marriage? I asked, grasping for something, anything. Doesn't that count for something? Daniel shook his head. Not when there's already a legal marriage in place. My mom and dad were married first. That marriage was never dissolved. Everything else is just void. I felt tears threatening again, but I forced them back. I had cried enough. Now I needed to think. To plan. To figure out how to protect myself in the wreckage of Robert's lies. So what does that mean? Sarah gets everything and I get nothing? After 30 years of marriage, of building a life together, I'm just left with nothing? Sarah came to the table and sat down, her face troubled. It doesn't have to be like that. Daniel and I have been talking. We don't want to take everything from you. That's not fair and it's not right. Yes, legally I have a claim to most of Robert's assets. But morally, you deserve something too. You were his partner for 30 years. You built a life with him. We need to figure out a way to split things fairly between both families. I looked at her, surprised. You would do that? After everything? Sarah reached across and squeezed my hand. Margaret, we're both victims here. Both of us loved a man who lied to us, who used us, who divided his life in ways that hurt everyone involved. I don't want to hurt you more than you've already been hurt. We need to work together to untangle this mess, not fight each other over scraps of what Robert left behind. Daniel cleared his throat. There's something else you need to know. I've been going through Dad's files here in the apartment. He kept meticulous records of everything. And I found something. He had a second will. The one the lawyers have is the official one that leaves everything to you, Margaret, because that's the identity he maintained publicly. But he had another will here, one that splits everything between both families. It's handwritten, dated 6 months ago, and witnessed by Father Michael. My head was spinning. Father Michael knew all of this? He witnessed a secret will? Daniel nodded. Apparently Dad confessed everything to him years ago. Father Michael has been keeping his secret, bound by the seal of confession or whatever. But when Dad asked him to witness this second will, he did it. Probably thought it was better than nothing. The question now is which will is legally valid, or if we can use both to figure out what Dad actually wanted. This was getting more complicated by the minute. I set down my coffee cup and looked at both of them. I think we need a lawyer. All of us together. We need someone who can help us navigate this legally and figure out what's fair. Because right now, my head is spinning and I can't think straight. Sarah nodded in agreement. I know someone. A family law attorney who specializes in complicated estates. I'll call her this morning and see if she can meet with all three of us. We spent the rest of the morning in that apartment, the three of us going through Robert's papers and documents, trying to piece together the full picture of his finances and assets. He had been incredibly organized, I had to give him that. Every expense was tracked, every account documented. He had truly lived 2 complete lives, down to the smallest detail. There were birthday gifts logged for Daniel that I had never known about. Anniversary dinners with Sarah documented while I thought he was at business conferences. Christmas presents, school tuition payments, vacation expenses. All carefully hidden in this apartment, in these files. He paid for my entire college education, Daniel said quietly, staring at a folder of tuition receipts. I always wondered how Mom afforded it on a teacher's salary. I thought maybe she had family money or something. But it was Dad all along, supporting both households, making sure we never went without. There was something in his voice, a mixture of gratitude and resentment, that perfectly captured the complicated feelings we all had about Robert. Around noon, Sarah's lawyer called back. She could meet with us that afternoon. We cleaned up, got dressed, and drove together to her office. It felt surreal, the three of us sitting in the waiting room like we were some kind of family. And I suppose in a strange way, we were. Not a traditional family, not the family any of us would have chosen, but bound together nonetheless by Robert's choices and the aftermath of his death. The lawyer's name was Jennifer Martinez, and she listened to our story with remarkable composure, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. When we finished, she sat back in her chair and let out a long breath. This is one of the most complicated situations I've ever encountered. Bigamy is illegal, of course, but since Robert is deceased, there's no one to prosecute. The question now is how to divide his estate in a way that's legally sound and morally fair to everyone involved. She explained that Sarah, as the legal wife, had the strongest claim to everything. But the second will, even though it was handwritten, could be argued as evidence of Robert's intentions. And there was something called equitable distribution that might apply, given that I had lived with Robert and contributed to the household for 30 years. It would require going to court, presenting evidence, and probably airing all of Robert's dirty secrets in public record. Or, Jennifer said, looking at all three of us, you could settle this among yourselves. Draw up a private agreement about how to split the assets. It would be cleaner, faster, and keep everything out of the public eye. But it would require all of you to agree and to trust each other. Sarah and I looked at each other. I think we can do that, Sarah said. I don't want to fight Margaret. I don't want to drag this through courts and make everything public. Robert hurt us enough. Let's not hurt each other more. I nodded in agreement. I just want what's fair. I don't want to take everything from Daniel and Sarah. They have just as much right to Robert's legacy as I do. Maybe more, since their marriage was the legal one. Daniel spoke up. What if we split everything 3 ways? A third for Mom, a third for Margaret, and a third for me. That seems fair, doesn't it? We're all Robert's family, even if it's not the traditional kind. Jennifer made some notes. I can draw up an agreement based on that. We'll need to inventory all of Robert's assets, including the house, bank accounts, retirement funds, life insurance policies, everything. Then we'll divide it all equally 3 ways. It might take a few weeks to get everything organized, but it's doable. And honestly, it's one of the most amicable resolutions I've seen in a situation like this. Over the next few weeks, Jennifer worked on the estate division while the 3 of us navigated our strange new relationship. I stayed in the apartment for a few more days before returning to my own house, but I found myself going back to Riverside Drive often. Sarah and I had coffee together. Daniel came by and we talked about Robert, sharing stories, filling in the gaps of each other's knowledge. It was painful and healing at the same time. I learned that Robert had been with Sarah when Daniel was born. That he had coached soccer for Daniel's team when he was in elementary school. That he had taught Daniel how to drive, how to do his taxes, how to tie a tie. All the father-son moments that I had assumed Robert never had because we didn't have children. He had them. Just not with me. And I told them about my life with Robert. The trips we took together. The way he always made my coffee exactly right. How he loved old movies and would quote lines to make me laugh. How we had renovated the house together, how he had been there for me when my mother died, how we had built a life that felt real and solid and true. Because even though it was built on lies, the moments themselves had been real. The love, at least on my side, had been genuine. Do you think he loved both of us? Sarah asked me one afternoon as we sat in her living room, going through photos. Or was it all just a lie, a game he was playing? I thought about it carefully. I think he loved us both. I think he was a deeply flawed, selfish man who made terrible choices, but I don't think he was a sociopath. I think he genuinely cared about both families. He just didn't have the courage to choose, so he tried to have both. And in doing so, he hurt everyone. Sarah nodded slowly. I've been so angry at him for so long. But now that he's gone, I find that I'm also sad. Sad for the life we could have had if he had just been honest. Sad for all the years we wasted living in this strange half-existence. Sad that Daniel grew up with only part of his father. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry, Margaret. I'm sorry that I knew about you and didn't tell you. I know that makes me complicit in Robert's lies. I took her hand. You were trapped too. He manipulated both of us. You were trying to protect your son and keep your family together. I understand that. I'm not angry at you anymore. I'm just angry at Robert for putting us all in this impossible situation. We sat there holding hands, two women who should have been enemies but had instead become something like friends, united in our grief and our betrayal. The legal process moved forward. Jennifer divided up the assets exactly as we had agreed. The house I lived in would be sold and the proceeds split 3 ways. Same with Robert's retirement accounts, his savings, everything. Daniel would inherit 1/3 of everything, which would help set him up for his future. Sarah would get 1/3, compensation for all the years she had kept Robert's secret and shared him with another family. And I would get 1/3, something to build a new life on now that my old life had been revealed as a fiction. But before we finalized everything, there was one more thing I needed to do. One more piece of Robert's letter that I hadn't dealt with. At the bottom of the last page, after all his confessions and apologies, he had written something else. There's one more thing you need to know, Margaret. One more secret I kept. In the bedroom closet, behind the safe, there's a loose board. Behind that board is a box. Inside that box is the truth about why I did what I did. The reason I could never tell you. The reason I lived this double life. Please, before you judge me completely, read what's in that box. Try to understand. I hadn't wanted to look. Hadn't wanted one more revelation, one more secret. But it haunted me. What else could there be? What could possibly explain or justify what Robert had done? Finally, about a month after the funeral, I went back to the apartment when Sarah and Daniel weren't there. I went into the bedroom, opened the closet, found the safe, and felt along the wall behind it until I found the loose board Robert had mentioned. Behind the board was indeed a box. Small, wooden, locked with a tiny padlock. But the key was there too, taped to the back of the board. I sat on the bedroom floor and opened the box with shaking hands. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. Old letters, yellowed with age, addressed to Robert. I pulled out the first one and started reading. And as I read, the final piece of Robert's puzzle fell into place. The letters were from Robert's mother. They were dated from when Robert was in college, around the time he would have met and married Sarah. And they revealed a secret that Robert had kept his entire adult life. His mother had been dying of cancer. Slowly, painfully, for years. And she had made Robert promise that he would take care of his father, who had early onset dementia and couldn't live alone. But Robert's father hadn't wanted to leave their small hometown. Hadn't wanted to move to the city where Robert had gotten his job. So Robert had been traveling back and forth, caring for his father, managing his affairs, while also trying to build a career and support Sarah and baby Daniel. The strain had been enormous. And then he met me. Met someone who didn't know about his complicated family situation, who didn't have expectations of him beyond what he could give in the moments we were together. I read letter after letter from Robert's mother, begging him to be strong, to take care of his father, to not let the family fall apart. And then letters from social workers and doctors documenting his father's declining health. Robert had been his father's primary caregiver for 15 years, making trips back to his hometown several times a month, managing medications and bills and eventually hospice care. And he had never told me. Had never mentioned his father was alive, let alone that he was sick. His father had died 10 years ago, according to the final papers in the box. But by then, Robert had been living his double life for so long that he didn't know how to stop. Didn't know how to confess to me that everything about our early relationship had been built on his need to escape from the crushing responsibility of caring for his dying parents while also supporting a wife and child. He had used me as an escape, a fantasy life where he could pretend to be someone simpler, someone without all those obligations. It didn't excuse what he did. Didn't make the lies okay. But it helped me understand. Robert hadn't started out planning to live two lives. He had been a young man overwhelmed by responsibility, who had made bad choices that snowballed into a complicated web of deception. And by the time he realized how deep he was, he didn't know how to get out without destroying everything. I called Sarah and Daniel and asked them to come to the apartment. When they arrived, I showed them the box, the letters, the documents about Robert's parents. Sarah started crying as she read them. "I didn't know," she said. "He never told me his parents were sick. He said they lived far away and we couldn't visit. I thought he was hiding me from them because he was ashamed. But he was hiding them from me because he didn't want me to know how bad things were." Daniel read through the papers with a strange expression on his face. He was taking care of his dad when he should have been at my baseball games. When he missed my birthday parties or school concerts, he was dealing with hospice nurses and dementia care. All this time I thought he was choosing someone else over me, but really he was just drowning in responsibilities and doing his best to keep all the plates spinning. Write in the comments if you think understanding someone's reasons changes whether you can forgive them, because that's the question I was facing. Did knowing why Robert did what he did make it any better? Did it change the fact that he had lied to all of us for decades? I didn't have easy answers. All I knew was that Robert had been human. Flawed, weak, overwhelmed, making terrible choices but trying in his broken way to take care of everyone. And failing. Failing all of us, including himself. We decided not to share this information publicly. It was Robert's private pain, his private shame, and it didn't need to become gossip for the community. The people who had known him could keep their memories of him as a good man. We three, the ones who knew the whole truth, could carry the complexity of who he really was. It felt like a final gift we could give him, even though he didn't deserve it. The house sold. The assets were divided. Jennifer finalized all the paperwork. I signed documents transferring property and closing accounts and officially ending my legal connection to Robert. Sarah and I had lunch one last time in the apartment before she put it up for sale too. Neither of us wanted to keep it. It held too many memories, too many secrets. Better to let it go and start fresh. "What will you do now?" Sarah asked me as we boxed up the last of Robert's things. I had been thinking about that question a lot. "I'm going to travel," I told her. "I'm going to take my share of the money and I'm going to see the world. All the places Robert said we would go someday but never did. All the experiences I put off because I was building a life with him. I'm 56 years old and I've spent the last 30 years living someone else's lie. Now I'm going to live my own truth." Sarah smiled. "That sounds wonderful. You deserve that, Margaret. You deserve to find out who you are when you're not defined by being someone's wife." We hugged goodbye, promising to stay in touch, knowing that we probably wouldn't. Our connection had been forged in trauma and would probably fade once the legal proceedings were done and we no longer needed each other. But I was grateful for her anyway. Grateful that she had been kind when she could have been cruel. Grateful that we had found a way to be allies instead of enemies. Daniel helped me carry the boxes to my car. Before I left, he gave me something. A photo of Robert, one I had never seen before. Robert was younger in it, maybe in his early 30s, smiling at the camera with genuine happiness in his eyes. "I want you to have this," Daniel said. "It's from before everything got so complicated. Before the lies got too big. When he was just my dad and maybe he still thought he could fix everything before anyone got hurt. I think we should remember him like this. Not perfect, but trying." I took the photo and looked at the man I had loved, the man who had betrayed me, the man who had been both more and less than I thought. "Thank you, Daniel. And thank you for not hating me." I know this could have gone very differently. Daniel shrugged. You're not responsible for what my dad did. None of us are. We're just the ones left behind to deal with it. Might as well deal with it together. I drove home that day, the last day I would ever spend in that apartment or in that part of town, and I felt something unexpected. Not closure, exactly, because I don't think you ever get complete closure from something like this. But maybe acceptance. Acceptance that Robert was gone. That the life I thought I had was over. That the future was uncertain but also full of possibility. That I was free now to become whoever I wanted to be, without the weight of secrets I didn't know I was carrying. 6 months later, I was in Paris. Sitting at a cafe, drinking wine, watching the sunset over the Seine. I had sold most of my belongings, kept only what mattered, and bought a one-way ticket to Europe. I had no plan, no timeline, no obligations. Just myself and the freedom to wander. Sometimes I thought about Robert. Wondered what he would think of me now, traveling alone, fearless, refusing to be defined by his betrayal. Sometimes I was angry at him still. Sometimes I missed him, missed the illusion of what we had been together. But mostly, I felt alive. More alive than I had felt in years. Because I was living for myself now. Not for a husband, not for a marriage, not for maintaining the fiction of a perfect life. Just for me. Margaret. 56 years old and finally figuring out who she really was. It turned out I was stronger than I thought. Braver than I knew. Capable of surviving the unthinkable and finding joy on the other side. I got a postcard from Daniel a few weeks into my trip. He had started therapy, was working through his complicated feelings about his father, was dating someone new. He said traveling sounded amazing and maybe he would come visit me somewhere if I stayed in one place long enough. I smiled reading it, imagining this young man who shared half his DNA with the person who had caused me so much pain, but who was nothing like Robert. Daniel was honest, direct, unafraid to confront difficult truths. He would be okay. We would all be okay. Sarah sent an email too. She had started painting again, something she had given up years ago when she became a mother and Robert's secret keeper. She said creating art helped her process everything, helped her find herself again after spending so long living in Robert's shadow. She attached a photo of one of her paintings. It was abstract, full of dark colors and sharp angles, but with bright spots of gold breaking through. Hope emerging from darkness. Healing happening slowly but surely. As for me, I kept moving. From Paris to Rome to Barcelona to Athens. Each city was a new adventure, a new chance to reinvent myself. I made friends with other travelers, shared stories over dinner and wine, danced in clubs even though I was decades older than most of the people there. I didn't care. I had wasted enough time worrying about what was proper or appropriate. Now I just wanted to live. One night in Santorini, watching the famous sunset from a cliffside restaurant, I raised a glass to Robert. To the man who had loved me imperfectly. To the husband who had given me 30 years of joy mixed with lies. To the complicated, flawed human being who had made terrible choices but had also, in his own way, tried to take care of everyone he loved. I forgave him, finally. Not because what he did was okay. But because holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting him to die. He was already dead. I was still alive. And I deserved to be happy. To Robert, I said quietly, glass raised to the setting sun. Thank you for the good parts. And thank you for setting me free, even if you didn't mean to. I drank the wine and watched the sun disappear below the horizon, taking the last of my old life with it. Tomorrow I would wake up in Greece. Next week, maybe Turkey. Next month, who knows? The world was open to me. The future was mine to write. And this time, I would make sure every word of my story was true. I never went back to the house we had shared, the house that had been sold to strangers who knew nothing of the secrets it had held. I never went back to the community that had known me as Robert's wife. I became someone new. Someone who existed independently, whose identity wasn't tied to a man or a marriage or a lie. It was terrifying and exhilarating and exactly what I needed. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the 30 years I spent with Robert. If I feel like I wasted my life on a lie. And the answer is complicated. Yes, I regret the deception. Yes, I hate that he lied to me and kept me in the dark. Yes, I'm angry that I lost time I can never get back. But no, I don't regret everything. Because those 30 years taught me things about myself. About my strength. About my capacity for love and forgiveness. About who I am when everything I thought was true turns out to be false. Robert's funeral, that envelope, that key, they were the beginning of a journey I never expected to take. A journey into truth, no matter how painful. A journey into myself, no matter how scary. A journey into freedom, no matter what it cost. And standing here now, on the other side of the worst thing that ever happened to me, I can honestly say I'm grateful. Grateful for the truth, finally. Grateful for the chance to start over. Grateful to be alive and free and myself. If you're going through something similar, if someone you loved has betrayed you or lied to you or destroyed the life you thought you had, let me tell you this, you will survive. It won't be easy. It will hurt more than you thought possible. But you are stronger than you know. And on the other side of this pain is a version of you that is more authentic, more powerful, more free than you ever imagined. Don't give up. Don't let their lies define you. Take back your story. Take back your life. And live it on your own terms. The priest handed me an envelope at my husband's funeral. Inside was the truth Robert hid for 30 years. That truth destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. But it also freed me to become who I was always meant to be. And for that, despite everything, I am grateful. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this one. Because life is complicated and messy and full of unexpected twists, but that's what makes it worth living. That's what makes us human. Our capacity to survive the unthinkable and find hope on the other side. I am Margaret. I am 56 years old. I am a survivor. I am free. And my story is just beginning.